Dr. Elia, how are you?
I'm doing great.
My
I just,
neighbor.
we're neighbors. I can't believe it. Like we're less than a mile away from one another, and you and I both talk all over the world, and yet here we are connecting. We're living in the same little town.
And we
So
both do the same thing in the sense of like when somebody asks us where we're from, we say Boulder because everybody knows Boulder,
right,
right? And we're not from Boulder, from this little town called Superior, right outside of Boulder.
that's right. That's right.
So very interesting. Man, your topic, happiness, the idea of human happiness is so interesting to me. Because I think it's something that we're all trying to achieve, right? Like
Yes.
at the end of the day, with all this division that we have, vote for Trump, vote for Hillary or Biden, right? All, mask and no mask, COVID, everything really comes down in my perspective of a human being trying to be happy,
Right.
which I don't think we are. But as a whole, I'm saying,
Yes.
um, but first tell me what you call happiness, and then how the hell did you end up here?
So, all right, you asked for it, so you're going to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
it.
I asked for it. I want it.
So I'm Greek. I was born and raised in Athens, Greece. And so I'm going to go back to my ancestors. The great Greek philosopher Aristotle, over 2,500 years ago, said this. He said, happiness is the whole purpose and meaning of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. Now think about what a profound statement that is. And it was true 2,500 years ago. It's even more true now. So, my path to happiness and how I became the happiness doctor and the happiness expert is really a very interesting story because it really started the day I was born. I know this may sound like really extreme, but as the story was told growing up in Greece, this is back in the old days. I'm old. So back in those days, there was no like FaceTime or Snapchat or
Look, I'm
cameras
old
or,
enough. I'm old enough for that,
all right.
Doc.
So basically it was just my mother and the doctor. So as the story was told with me growing up, my dad shows up, and I guess we were all like 5 little babies were born in the same hospital in Athens, wrapped up in the same white generic blanket back in the day behind a window. My dad, kind of a tough Greek guy, whiskey, smoking and all that stuff. He goes up to the nurse and he goes, which one's my son? Just like that. And I guess at that moment, I had a big smile on my face. So the nurse turns to my dad, he goes, your son, he's the happy one. And boom, I was branded the happy one. So growing up in my home, that's the story that was told. Elia, you came out of the womb happy. You've always been happy and so on. Now, fast forward 25 years. Now I'm in graduate school, getting my PhD in psychology.
Are you in Greece still, or are you here in America?
No, we're back. No, my family emigrated to Santa Monica, California.
Okay.
When I was 10 years old. And middle school, high school, UCLA, PhD, and all that stuff. Now, back to that, because this is important. This relates to the day I was born. The professor is talking to us about nature versus nurture and how do we become the way we are? Is it our genetic predisposition or is it our environment? And obviously it's both of them, right? They both contribute. But I had this terrible thought. I'm like, wait a minute. What if my dad was like got stuck in traffic? He's 15 minutes late, shows up to the same hospital, the same nurse asks the same question, which one is my son? And at that very moment, I'm like, I have terrible stomach pains and I'm screaming my head off and my face is all red. And the nurse turns to my dad and goes, your son, he's the cranky one. And then I am raised in a home that I'm told, you know what, you came out of the womb cranky, you miserable little beep. So now we've all been branded in life. If you go back to your early childhood, your early memory, everyone has had a brand of some sort. Some brands are positive and beautiful. In my particular case, I mean, the happiness, you can't get any better than that. But there are other brands, the smart one, the cute one, the princess, the gentle one, the loving one, the creative one, the athletic one, this books. So a lot of these brands are great. And if you've been blessed with a brand that's positive, truly, like, just count your blessing, man, because it's rare. However, having worked as a clinical psychologist for 18 years, the first half of my career before I went to corporate, and having worked with tens of thousands of people, I can tell you this, that most people's brands have not been positive growing up. And without going into all the negativity, I will tell you the top 3 most common. Now, you might say to me after you hear them, who would say that to their kid? But the fat one, the ugly one, or the stupid one. those are the most common negative brands. So
You're
fast
right. I'm
forward.
saying who the hell calls their kid the fat
I
one?
know, I know that, but listen to me. These are people that have shared that with me in the
Right.
privacy of my office in extreme vulnerability. So now, about 5 years ago, I wrote this book, 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, #1 bestseller. Started to like travel the country and share the message. And I'm doing a conference in North Carolina, a women's conference, 500 women and me. And I'm sharing this story. And in the end, my point is, if you don't like your brand, to empower people and to empower women in that particular, you have the right and you have the choice now as an adult to reject your negative brand and create your own positive brand. So as I'm sharing this story, there's this old lady in her 70s, gray hair, who stands up and starts waving her arms, and kind of like, I can't ignore her because she's up standing and waving her arms. Like, so I'm in my flow, like I'm doing my thing, right? But everybody's looking at her, looking at me like so I stop my talk. I'm like, yes, ma'am. And she says to me in front of everybody else, she says, you know what, after listening to you, for 70 years, I've had that voice in my head. And I was called all 3 of them growing up: fat, ugly, stupid, beep, with an expletive next to it. And she says to me, after listening to you, I want to change my brand. Now, as she shared this with the audience, it got so quiet, Elliot, you could hear a pin drop. Because first of all, I don't know if I would have the courage to share that in front of 500 strangers. Personally, I don't know if I would be that courageous to be that vulnerable and transparent. So hats off to that lady. So they're looking at me, I'm looking at them. So finally, I'm like, okay, ma'am, well, what would you like your brand to be? Like, if you want to change your brand in front. And her name was Leah, sorry, the first name. She goes, well, from now on, I want to be known as Princess Leia, kind of like Star Wars. So I turned around, I'm like, yes, Your Majesty. So I bowed down, Your Majesty, yes, Your Majesty. And, it became a very lighthearted moment. Everybody cracked up and everybody started to laugh. But the reason why I share this story is this: if a 70-plus-year-old woman is capable of changing her brand consciously and choosing a positive, different brand, then anybody else can do it. Because our personal brand directly impacts both our happiness and health, or on the flip side, our unhappiness and misery.
How do you look? I agree 100%. If a 70-year-old lady can change who she is at 70, like that's a lot of hard wiring and that's a lot of nature and nurture interacting for a really, really long time there. Man, how do you do it? Like, it's so hard for people, right? Like this path to happiness.
Well, the path to happiness, first of all, happiness is a choice. Okay. But also happiness is a skill set. In other words, there's some people that are easier. There's a certain predisposition there. You have a happier personality, energy.
The nature part. That's the nature part.
Right. And but happiness is also a skill set, meaning that if you do certain things on a consistent basis, I personally guarantee you'll find happiness. But you got to do them consistently.
Okay, and, talk to me.
Number 1, first path, of course, self-love. The biggest. And when I was a psychologist, I worked with a lot of addicts, a lot of addicts. My dissertation was on Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And regardless of whatever the addiction is, in the end, what does it come down to? Self-love. Because if you truly love yourself, you would never poison your system. Right? Healthy and happy people just don't do self-destructive things to themselves. And self-destructive things start from self-defeating thoughts. That's where it starts. I'm no good, therefore, they act out and they hurt themselves, and that begins the cycle, of course.
What do you do to have people help themselves get out of those thoughts, right? Because sometimes we don't even realize that we're having those thoughts. It's the undercurrent of our life, right? I'm reading this book called Mindfulness to Insight. It's that, like, you don't even know you're having the thought. And then by the time that you realize that you're having the thought, you are so far on the downhill of the roller coaster. Oh, man.
It makes it much harder. But you just actually mentioned path number 2, which is really self-awareness, right? Mm-hmm. I come from a part of Greece that's very close to the Oracle of Delphi. Delphi was this, back in the ancient days, kings and emperors and generals would go to the Oracle of Delphi, which is up in the mountain, to ask either permission, should I go to war or not, And the Oracle was never wrong, but it would always answer in a very cryptic way,
They had that in 300, right? Like, didn't they have that?
Exactly.
In the,
No,
yeah,
no.
yeah. They went and talked to the
Yeah,
oracles.
yeah. Well, my home is actually 20 minutes from there. Like, I can actually see from
Okay.
my balcony. I can see so. And of course, the oracle would answer in some cryptic way, like a great empire will fall. Well, what does that mean? The Greek army will fall, or the Persian Empire? You don't know. But
Right.
but why do I share this? Because in the entrance, which still exists, of the Temple of Apollo, which where it has two words: know thyself. Know thyself obviously means self-awareness, which is of course what emotional intelligence is based on, right? So coming back to what you just said, Elliot, how do you have to actually gain some self-awareness, because without self-awareness, how can you move forward, right? So
Well,
self-awareness is
you
a
have to
big
know where
thing.
you are, right? You have to know where
Exactly,
you are to be able to go anywhere.
exactly. And
So,
that requires some deep introspection and mindfulness, like you said, and honesty with oneself. And I talk a lot about having hot conversations, hot, H-O-T, meaning honest, open, and transparent. Usually that's with other people, but I'm actually saying right now to you and I, those hot conversations need to happen internally too. If we're going to make the work be successful, I need to have hot conversations with myself, be honest, open, and transparent with my weaknesses, my shortcomings, my vulnerabilities, because otherwise there's very little progress being made.
so often people want to hide them,
Of
our
course.
weaknesses, our shortcomings, our vulnerabilities, right? We become aware of them, but then we're like, oh, no, 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 right? Like,
Especially men.
oh, we're the worst. Look,
They're the
it's
worst.
my opinion of all of the problems that we have going on in the world. I believe we have a male problem, you
We
know,
do.
and I believe that's where almost everything here stems from. I believe we have two things going on. We actually have weak men, you know, and we actually have like I don't know if you've seen. I always use this example because it drives me more crazy than the outwardly weak. Is the lions not sheep? I'm a fucking lion, man. Don't you know? And I'm like, yo, homie, lions don't scream, they're lions. You know.
Exactly. Exactly.
So this is the male problem because we won't just be okay with our benefits and our drawbacks that we all have.
Well, it's kind of interesting, and this is not a political statement. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be taken that way, but it's interesting that during the pandemic, the countries that did the very best in dealing with it were led by women prime ministers across the globe. We need more women in positions of power, and we need more of the feminine energy in positions of power, including the feminine energy within us men, actually.
I don't know if I'll go as far as we need more women. I think that if they're the ones fitting the job, then please, by all means, yes. I think a man can do it. He has to not be a douchebag.
Yeah, but part of that is being in touch with their own feminine side, is what I'm telling you.
Right, of course.
Because
Yeah. What do
there's
you
a
call
lot
the
of
feminine
power.
side?
I think the nurturing, the loving, the kind, the giving, the heart, more heart centered and less. I deal with a lot of C-suite people. They're all talking about mindset. You know what? What about your heart set? We don't even use that phrase. Everybody talks about the mindset. What is your mindset? Yeah, the mindset is important, but where is your heart? And to me, my heart, I have a big heart. I'm Greek. I love big. And my goal is to love even more, to be more open, more vulnerable, more transparent the older I get. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
less hiding, more open. And one of the beauties about getting old is that I don't give a shit. Like, as I get old, like, I don't care. This is who I am. You like me, great. You don't like me, that's fine too. I don't have to prove anything to anybody anymore, which is it's a wonderful place to be.
Well, it's a wonderful place for happiness is too, right? Because if my happiness is dependent on how someone else is viewing me, that I don't have any control over that.
Right. And again, the last 2 years, this humanity as a whole, and we've taken a beating. We've gotten our butts kicked. Humanity is down on one knee. However, and I always think about the glass is not always full. Sometimes it's overflowing with. I believe that there's so many great lessons that have come out of the last 2 years. And my biggest takeaway personally is do not procrastinate your happiness. That people have asked me all over, like, what's your biggest takeaway? Do not procrastinate your happiness, meaning don't wait for when my kids grow up, or when I retire, or when I get a raise, or when I'm in the right relationship, or when this or when. Forget all the whens. One of the great things about the pandemic is none of us know if we're going to be here a month or two from now. As a result of that, live your best life now. Love big now. Show up big now. Be real now. Be authentic now. Be vulnerable now.
The pandemic definitely showed us how little control we have. And I think we're seeing all these mental health problems and this lack of happiness because all of the outside effects, you tell me, I'm asking your opinion here, all of the outside things that we did to be happy got stripped away, right?
Completely.
Everything got stripped away.
Yes.
Like, especially that first 2 months, right? Like, you couldn't even go see, like, everyone, I don't care where you stand now, everyone was afraid to go see their neighbor on March 30th of 2020, 2 weeks into it.
Yes. You know what's really interesting? On March 15th of 2020, I downloaded, as loud as I'm talking to you right now, that Elia, you need to write a book about the pandemic now, and you need to get out in like 45 days because there's a tsunami of mental health issues that are going to come as a result of the pandemic. And of course, I call it downloading. I'm a spiritual person. If you call it the spirit or your higher self or your intuition, whatever that voice is, pay attention to it. My first reaction is, my first book took 4 years to write. How am I going to get a book out in 45 days? That's ridiculous. But I called my writing partner, my best friend, my partner, and I said, listen, man, I'm going to start writing this book tomorrow. Are you in or are you out? And he didn't hesitate. He goes, I'm in. And we got it out in 45 days. The first book that hit the market about the pandemic in the world. It came out in May of 2020, 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis. How to emotionally deal with pandemics and other disasters. And that's changed the last year and a half for me, honestly, because so we discovered a few things about, and forget about the word crisis. I'm talking about challenges in life.
Mm-hmm.
That human beings have 4 different reactions to any kind of challenge or crisis. 4 different personality types, let's call them that. The first one is the victim. And the victim is, why is this happening to me? As if it's only happening to me and not 7 billion other people, right? That's the victim. The second one is the critic. And their modus of operation is, when they face a challenge, is to get mad and to criticize. This is a silly example again. Elia, you should wear a mask. Well, that's stupid. Okay, Elia, don't wear a mask. What are you trying to kill me? Like, it doesn't matter which way they go. They just get mad, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. The third personality type we like to call the bystander. Now, the bystander, mind you, is a decent person, a good fellow or woman, but they're so overwhelmed by the changes and feeling so out of control by everything that's happening that they're kind of like the deer with the headlights look, meaning that they're just frozen in fear. And what all 3 of these have in common is they don't move the needle forward in some positive outcome or solution. Either it's poor me, they get mad, or they're just frozen in fear, right? Now we get to the 4th personality type, which we like to call the navigator, which was, of course, the premise of the, how to navigate challenges successfully. But before I share with you, what does the navigator do successfully? I want to share this, that all 4 of those personality types exist within each human being. This is my psychologist hat wearing now. It's not like, well, I'm the navigator and you're a victim. It's not like that. We all have all 4 of those, or we're capable at least of all 4 of those. And since you brought up what happened at the beginning of the pandemic in March, the week before I had this download, March 15th, the beginning, early March, all my speaking engagement in Elliott got canceled all over the world in 1 week. Email after email, cancellation. So did I have the deer with the headlights look? You're darn right I did. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? And did I feel like a victim? Yeah. I mean, I was supposed to speak in Barcelona in October 2020. I did it on this camera, but it's not the same talking to this camera from Superior than traveling to Spain. And have I been critical of the previous administration from time to time? Anyway, yes, I've been critical at times of the responses that several, however, if I stay mad at the World Health Organization or the United Nations or the government or whatever for 6 months, who am I hurting, them or me? I'm robbing myself of happiness. If I feel like poor me for 3 months and I sit here and I sulk because I can't go to Barcelona, I can't travel, and I can't do that, who am I hurting? Myself. The point being, if you feel like a victim, or if you get mad from time to time, which are normal human emotions, or even if you're fearful, do it, lean into your emotions, do it for half an hour, and then pivot and shift and become a navigator. I will tell you this, there were no plans last year to write a book because my schedule was booked at the beginning of the year. But guess what? I couldn't travel, I couldn't speak in the way that I wanted to. So I pivoted and did something else. And navigators have that in common. They practice great self-care to begin with. They really invest in themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. They do listen to that still small voice and act upon it. They tend to be very flexible and adaptable when things come to them. And that's how they face challenges. They practice a lot of flexibility and adaptability.
You know, you've mentioned self-care a bunch here. So, you know, like love, self-love and all of that. What are some things that you do for self-care?
First of all, I created this personal health assessment, which is part of the book that now it's been gone to hundreds of thousands of people across and I would like to share that with you in a PDF format for free, and you can share with your audience. 20 simple questions, 5 for physical, 5 for mental, 5 for emotional, and 5 for spiritual. And I take this assessment, just so you know, myself on the first of every month. So it's not a one-off. It takes about 2 minutes, but it gives you a snapshot of how am I doing in these different areas. On a scale of 1 through 5, 5 doing great, 1 I don't do anything. First of all, it shows you the things you're doing well. Because if you score anything 4 or 5, you're doing really well. If you score a 3, you're doing it sometimes. That's not a bad score. It just means there's room for improvement. But if you score yourself a 1 or a 2 in any of these 20 questions, those are red flags because they clearly will rob you of your health and your happiness. So what I changed in one of them, one of the physical, what's your level of exercise? I used to walk 3 days a week before the pandemic hit for an hour, 3 miles, because I had to, because I got gray hair, I'm getting older. But when my own stress level increased last April, especially from April 2020, I made a shift consciously I walk now every single day, 7 days a week, no matter what the weather is outside, no matter where I am, traveling or not. And now I do it because I want to, not because I have to. And blue skies, trees, squirrels.
So you're walking tomorrow in the blizzard?
Yes, and I'm going to walk no matter what. And if I know if it's a real, I'll do 6 miles today. And if I skip tomorrow, in other words, I'm maintaining that. And 50% of the time, Elliot, I don't take my phone with me. I mean, the other 50%, I do clients and so on. But sometimes I leave my phone behind and I walk and I'm in a state of gratitude. But like it's an hour. I'm not saying it's an hour of gratitude prayer necessarily, but I'm grateful. I'm mindful. I connect with God. I connect with my inner self. And, obviously vitamin D, sunshine and all that stuff. Yes, I walk every single day. And that's a shift that even when the pandemic is over, I'm going to continue doing it because now it's become a habit. The other thing is that I'm eating more mindfully. I'm Greek. I love sweets, but I eat only when I'm hungry, not because I'm supposed to eat. And as a result of that, I've never had problems with weight, but I'm actually below my premarital weight, which was over 30 years ago. My wife and I have been married for 30 years. I weigh less now than I did back then, just to give you an idea. Just from these 2 simple things, walk every day and eating more mindfully. And that's part of my self-care because if my stress level increases, my self-care has to increase, period.
How do people, look, you already know, you wrote this book, How to Navigate a Crisis. Sometimes you're just in crisis.
Yes.
Right. And you have to understand, like there's seasons of life, right? I'm sure there's been seasons of your life, Doc, right? Like where you're like, okay, things are really going well right now. In all of my areas, my emotional, my physical, my familial, right? Everything's really going well. And then there's other times when it's not, right? It's not, your marriage isn't going well. Your kids are, I'm sure all things that you've experienced, right? How do you stay quote unquote happy?
So there's 2 things. So the second path after to happiness, of course, is gratitude. And we all hear the phrase, have an attitude of gratitude, which is great. It rhymes and it's cute. It's easy to be grateful when everything is going well in your life, just like you just mentioned.
So simple, right? Oh man,
that part is easy.
Everyone.
Yeah, that part is easy. However, we all know that life isn't like that. And what I share with you is I feel like we're all graduates from the University of Adversity. Every single one of us, we're graduates from the University of Adversity. And the older we get, the higher the degree. Because by the time you get to my age, at some point, you know, you're going to, no matter who you are, you're going to lose loved ones, starting with maybe with your grandparents. And at some point, you're going to lose your parents. And so at some point, you may even lose your significant other, or God forbid, your child. And at some point, you're going to have financial difficulties, unemployment, underemployment, bankruptcy, whatever, foreclosure. I mean, you're going to go through a divorce or a breakup of a relationship. You may have to deal with a parent that has Alzheimer's or dementia, or a child that's sick. So we're all,
as Buddhism, as you know, it's the number one noble truth of Buddhism: life is suffering.
Exactly. So now the question becomes, how can you be grateful in the midst of adversity? And I will refer back to one of the greatest men who ever lived, Nelson Mandela, who said, in life, either you win or you learn. Because that takes the suffering, if there's a lesson attached to it. I have learned the most profound things in my life when things sucked. Because when things are going well, we're in our comfort zone. We love it. It's good. That's why it's called the comfort zone. But real growth, as you know very well, you're in the octagon. I mean, you know this. Real growth happens outside of our comfort zone. I saw your video, man. It was very powerful. Real growth happens outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so, but if I can find the lesson in my adversity, it makes things better. If I can't, I'm going to continue to suffer and beat myself up and say why, or be the victim, or get mad, or why is this happening to me? Well, navigators are able to find the lesson in whatever the adversity is. Maybe not right away. I mean, sometimes it takes a while. You have to dig. Like, why is this happening to me? Especially if the crisis is prolonged.
Sure, man. It's a little cold in my room right now, but you've mentioned the Greek thing a couple of times. I have in Greek on my arm the Marcus Aurelius quote: "The impediment of action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And that's just what it is for me. That is how I deal with adversity. I just realized that. I have a funny story. Once I was in Boston, and I think I was waiting to get into Fenway Park or something, and I had my forearm up on a ledge, and I see this guy reading my forearm. And look, I did my best on the internet, right, to get the words right, like Google Translate or whatever. And I'm like, oh shit, this guy's about to tell me if I have some craziness written on my arm, or if it says what I want. And it says what I want. So that was good. But that's a tough thing to realize, though, right? Like what you're talking about is because we want suffering to end.
Of course.
We want suffering to end. But almost the wanting of it to end makes it worse. It delays the happiness.
I think one of the biggest issues, especially the last 2 years, is that I think there were some false promises. And again, scientists didn't know everything at the beginning, that this too is going to end. Okay, summer's coming. Okay, fall's got, then another year. So people are just exhausted. They're tired. Most human beings can handle one or two crises happening at the same time. We've done it our entire lives. It's very hard for them to handle like 4 or 5 or 6 crises happening. So you have the pandemic, you have the mental health crisis where depression, anxiety, and stress is at an all-time high, billions of people that did not have a pre-existing condition. You have the financial insecurity, even if you're employed or underemployed, you just feel like, I don't know how I'm going to support myself or my loved ones. Then you have the social, political, and racial, and everything else that's going to, or threats of war now. I mean, we have a lot of other things. So those are 4 major crises happening globally simultaneously. And that doesn't include people's personal crises, like we talked about before, like going through a separation or a divorce or a sick child or a parent or whatever. I'm not even counting those. So it's very hard if you don't know when the end is. Like we keep just like, when is this going to end? Like, when are the masks going to be over? Like, I'm so sick and tired of like traveling like this. People are sick and tired. They're sick. They're tired. They're exhausted. So how do you maintain a perspective, right?
How do you deal with that? Yeah. How do you deal with, look, there's no one in the world right now that's not exhausted.
Yes.
I'm exhausted, right? I'm exhausted.
But
lucky for me, we got to take, Denver ended its mask mandate. So we got to take the mask mandate off the door today at one of my schools. Good for us, right?
That's down in Denver. It's still not in Boulder, not where we live.
Yeah, Boulder's
I don't know when it's going to end. Yeah.
Right. It's never going to end in Boulder. you know, but anyway, how do we deal with it? This is such a pain in a man, like the emotional victim side of me, like you talked about, right? Or the critic. Man, this is such a pain in my ass.
It is, but this too shall pass. And what navigators have, one of their characteristics, that they do have a positive attitude. They feel like, yes, we're getting our butts kicked. No question. Yes, this is lasting longer than any one of us had predicted, but it's not the end of humanity. Has life changed significantly? It has, but we're going to return to some kind of normalcy. I don't like the phrase "the new normal" because I think it's overused. When I talk with senior leaders and organizations, I talk to them about the next normal, meaning prepare for 6, 12 to 18 months down the line. Forget about the new normal because it keeps changing. But they're also, as difficult and as painful and as deadly the pandemic has been and has interrupted our lives severely, there's also some great lessons that have come out of it. And I tend to focus on that. Like in some people are living lives a lot more purposefully now. They're living lives a lot more meaningfully, more mindfully, and they're more connected, and they've realized, you know what, I hate the rat race. That's why we have the great resignation. People are leaving their jobs left and right. Why? Because the last 2 years, they realized what's really important. And the most important things in life, Elliot, are not things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and I
And
know
so,
that because we just went through a major fire in our neighborhood. The most
right,
important
yeah,
things in life, we evacuated. The most important things in life are not things, they're people and relationships.
I was just about to bring up the fire because I wasn't even in town. I was in Maui. You know, I was on Maui, and you know, it was like, well, you know, somebody was house sitting my dog, and he brought the dog with him, and I told him to get a couple of things because he was staying at my house. You know, a couple of valuables, and I was like, that's it.
That's
Nothing I
it.
can do about it. I might as well go to the beach,
Right.
right? I might as well go to the beach because there's nothing I can do about that fire that's in Colorado, and everything that was really important to me wasn't there.
Right.
So,
And you know, we evacuated, and we had, you know, we have a couple of homes here, and we were like, at some point, the you know, there's a little camera in our front door, the Ring camera, and
yep.
at 8 o'clock at night, that went down. And I turned to my wife, and we had our kids and our pets with us, and you know, and I'm like, honey, I think we've lost, you know, this is our dream home. I think we lost our home. We cried, we hugged, and then at some point in the middle of the night, it's like, okay, you come to terms with the fact that, man, we probably have lost everything, and it's still okay. I mean, I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
it's hard, of course, because we have over 1,000, you and I have over 1,000 neighbors and friends that have lost everything.
Everything. Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
not downplaying that, but it's a weird feeling when you know there's nothing I can do. We probably have lost everything. And then we're starting to think, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to rebuild? Should we move out of Colorado? Is this a sign? Like we start having these other discussions. So of course, when we came back, then we saw that everything was still here, and we feel so blessed and grateful. There's survivor's guilt. Because I went through a whole week of survivor's guilt after the first of the year, like really depressed. And I don't get
Really,
very often, really down. Well, absolutely, because how come all our homes
the
survived?
whole town was walking around like it was on Xanax,
I know.
right? Like it was like you would go out, and you know, because I got back a couple of days later, you'd go out and it'd be like it was just this numbness. Didn't
Numb.
matter if you lost your house or not. Like everyone lost their house, it felt like.
But then, you know, again, we pivoted and became navigators. Even my wife and I and our neighbors, who are great neighbors, who, you know, we started feeding the homeless and the displaced. So we moved into action rather than, but the first week, the first 3 or 4 days, I mean, like zombies, exactly what you just described. But then when you start moving into action and started helping, we adopted one family that are friends of ours that have lost everything. And anyway, so there was when you start to do something about it, you feel better.
Right, for sure. You get to work. You know, I'm a person who experiences anxiety. You know, it's one of my traits that can pop up, and very acute and intense anxiety. And my son, who's my mini me, my oldest is my mini. He's me on steroids. Like everything that's great about me, he's better, you know, and everything that could be more skillful, well, he's got that one too. So anxiety is one of his things, and that's one of our tricks together. Is I'm like, okay, you're good. So do something. Like when he starts to like go down the downhill, I'm like, all right, man, let's get some push-ups and some sit-ups and some squats, right? Let's do something hard. Let's army crawl, because there's no solving the quote unquote anxiety in the moment. You have to occupy it. from
I
my
mean, it's just
perspective.
energy that needs to move through your
That
system.
needs to move. Yes, yeah, that's what I tell them. So, and that's how we work, like, and
But on
so
a more cognitive level or an emotional level, of course, I mean, what is, what's underneath any anxiety, what is that? There's a certain fear. It's
fear,
that fear-based emotion. So then we got to get it, okay, well, what are we really afraid of?
right?
And then deal with that. But the physical aspect of it, I think is great that you're teaching your son to do that, because
Well, we
yeah.
do that after. We do
I see.
we do the what is after. But in the moment, like talking through it in the moment does nothing, right?
Right.
Like when you're tripping, why are you so scared? Yeah, that ain't helping me.
Yeah.
Right. So but yeah,
What's kind of funny? I had a client that actually called me not last night, the night before, and she was full blown anxiety attack. Like she had gone to the hospital the day before, thinking she had a heart attack. It turns out to
right.
be just anxiety to the max, panic attack, actually pretty severe for her.
Yeah.
And she was starting to, and I could just hear her, even her breathing on the phone. And I've known this girl for like, I mean, she could be my daughter. I've known her for a long time. I'm like, honey, this feeling is going to pass, right? And she goes, you're in the moment. She thought this is going to be all forever.
That's
Like,
it.
but somehow it just clicked. I said, keep breathing, just focus on your breathing and stuff like that. But she goes, you're totally right. This does pass. I just forget about it when I'm in, like, just like you said, when I'm in it, I forget it.
Yeah. So, man, as we wrap it up here, there's a couple of things that I really find interesting with people. The first, man, look, you speak all over the world. You wrote best-selling books. I mean, now you would do it because you're my neighbor, and we're probably going to have a coffee together at some point.
Sure.
But like, why take the time? Like, you're going to get nothing out of this. Like, you won't make any more money.
That's not true.
Yeah, I want to hear your reasoning, right? Like, you're not going to make more money necessarily. No one's going to become a follower. This isn't like Tim Ferriss's podcast where there's millions and millions of listeners. So why take your hour of your day to do it with something that, quote unquote, and I know it's not, seems very meaningless?
It's never meaningless when we're talking about happiness, first of all, and love. Number two, you invited me, and I accepted the invitation, and I get something out of it every time I get interviewed. Even it could be the same topic, because the interviewer, you in this case, comes from a very different perspective, and your approach is very different. So for me, I really like that. But in the end, to get back to your point, if one person makes a significant change in their lives for the positive as a result of the conversation that you and I just had, this hour has been more than worth it. Because think about that. What if one person, only one person, maybe it's you, maybe it's me, maybe it's some other listener, changes one aspect of their lives and creates better habits and healthier habits and happier habits, then it's worth it. It's not always about money. It's like, I get paid sometimes significant amounts of money to speak, to do exactly the same thing. And other times I do it for free, because I guess the question, why? My grandpa, Elia, whose name I carry and I honor, died when I was 5.5 years old. But when I was 5, and I think about this is in Greek, so I'm going to translate this. He pulled me aside, and he was a gentle soul. And he said to me, my boy, kind of like in Greek, if you want to be happy in life, all you need to do is do something good for somebody else every single day, and you'll be the richest man in the world, end quote. Now, in my 5-year-old little brain, somehow it clicked. So if I do something good for somebody else every day, then I'm going to be a rich man. And rich, he meant, of course, not monetarily. And that became my guide as I became a psychologist and so on afterwards. It's like, my whole purpose in life is to leave this world a better place than I found it. And if my life ended today, I can definitely tell you that's more than on the plus side. So I continue. My whole point is to continue to spread love and happiness to as many people as I can. And by the way, when I told you that all my speaking engagements last year got canceled, and they did.
Sure.
Guess what happened? Because of this little camera up here, last year, I probably spoke in front of 40 to 50,000 people across the globe, more than I ever have in any other day. It just didn't happen the way that I am used to it. You show up, speaker up on stage, blah, blah, blah. No, it happened here because I had to become flexible and adaptable and change how I present my message. Do I love doing things live? Absolutely. And I've done a couple, 2 or 3 live events here in Colorado. I love it. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue sharing the message of love and happiness, no matter where I go, no matter who invites me, period.
I
And
really
that's
like what you're,
rewarding in and of itself. That's rewarding
yeah.
in and of itself. I don't need anything more than that.
I really like what your grandfather said, right? Like, do one thing every day, because that one thing doesn't matter what your profession is. You could be a plumber, right? You
Yes.
could you could pick up the trash, but man, you're like, do it like it matters. Do it like
Yes.
it matters. Know that it is very important that everyone gets their trash picked up, and
And
go
the
from
last
there.
path to happiness and to navigating Christ successfully is kindness. We start with self-care, which is kind of like, take care of ourselves. But in the end, it's how are you showing up in terms of other people, and how are you being of service and kind to other people around you? Because if anybody can hear the sound of my voice or your voice right now, I guarantee you they're better off than somebody else. All they got to do is look around. And Elliot, do you know that I've gotten pushback on that when the message is go out and be kind and be of service in the middle of the pandemic? I've had people say to me on camera, like live, you know what? I'm unemployed. I'm in my little apartment. I can't go anywhere. What am I, my brother's keeper? This actual quote. And I didn't think that. I'm like, no, you're not your brother's keeper. You're your mother's keeper and your sister's keeper and the neighbor's keeper and the homeless person down the street. Because if you're listening to me, I guarantee you're better off than somebody else. And kindness is free. Kindness doesn't cost anything other than the willingness to show up for somebody else when they need you.
Man, you're so right on here. I can, when I think back to my most recent very difficult struggle, it was 2016 with my anxiety. And what got me out was other people. What got me out was just like, Elliot, show up for somebody else, right? Like, oh, okay, this is a struggle for you right now. A, B, C, D, E, F, G reasons why. Show up for your students. For me, it was my martial arts students and my kids, right? Show up for them, make it happen, and then cry all the way through the night. Who fucking cares?
Right.
So, yeah. Last question as we wrap.
And by the way, why
yeah.
why is that? Happy people by their own nature tend to do acts of service and kindness because their batteries are full. On the flip side, of course, as you know, when we perform an act of kindness and be of service to somebody else, something happens to us innately. We feel better no matter what. So I've learned that when I get down and the poor me and all that stuff, the quickest way for me to get out of my poor me myself, the victim mode, is to get up and go and do something for somebody else, because afterwards I feel a heck of a lot better. Not that my problems were resolved necessarily,
right?
It just feels better.
Some altruism helps with your narcissism.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I believe everyone has a unique power in the world, something that they go out and they give to the world. It makes them amazing. And like you and your grandfather have been saying here, doesn't make you rich, doesn't make you famous. Sometimes you do it for free, and sometimes you do it and you get lots of money. Who knows? What's your power?
Love. And it comes easy to me. My wife says, how do you love so many people so much and so deeply and profoundly, and how you show up? And I have, my mom died when I was young, and she was all about love. I was on the receiving end of her unconditional love. And I feel like I channeled her love. It just flows through me. It never ends. And I've got so much of it. It's like, and it's easy. Like, how can you do? Well, I just show up with love. So love, that's my power, superpower.
Right.
And I've had it since I was young, man. It's not like it's nothing recent. It's just, when you get older and there's certain maturity that takes place, you begin to say that every interaction matters. With a homeless person with the sign, or a customer service representative that, you're mad because of their product income, they're still a human being. Treat them with kindness and respect. They didn't cause your problem. They're just there trying to resolve it. Don't get mad at them. The lady at the supermarket that you're scanning your food, smile. Say, you look great today. How's your day going? Be like, these are all free. They don't cost anything. Just be loving and kind.
I love Whole Foods. I love the people at Whole Foods.
Yes.
They're my favorite people. I agree with you.
Okay, there you go.
So, yeah. Dr. Elia, thank you so much for coming on. Tell everyone, if they want to learn more about you, where is that? Where can they get your books and all that stuff?
Well, both of the books are on Amazon, but if you go to my website, dreliagourgouris.com, or LinkedIn, you can also find me there too. Those are the best two places, LinkedIn or dreliagourgouris.com. That's it.
All right. Guys, as always, Dr. Elia has his unique and special power that he goes out and gives to the world. I have my unique and special power and thing that I go out and give to the world. Don't try to be him and don't try to be me. Everybody go out there and find your own power.